Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. So today something a bit different. You'll have seen from the thumbnail. Just want to mention something, and that is that I have managed to publish a book, and I wanted to show a proper copy of it, but the printer has delayed my consignment of freebie copies, so I'm going to have to show this one. It's got a strip across the front which says "Not for resale." So I'm going to flash up a couple of pictures of actual copies of the book which have so far been purchased by several very kind people. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about this really and how this all came to be. So this is the story of Squeeze, and you can see my ugly mug on the back there. That's me done in the style of the pencil crayon drawings of Squeeze, which were on the back of the original 45 single of Cool for Cats. I'd always wanted to get my face done in that style, so when I did the book I thought to myself, right, now's my chance. So I got my friend Mark Follows down in Shrewsbury to do that for me. And I'll talk about the book cover a little bit later in the video and explain to you how that came to be. But really I just wanted to come on and just explain about what this is all about really. I had the idea to write a book about Squeeze back in the 90s, and I should just say, ever since I was a kid, I mean, I've always been such a bookish person, you know, obsessed with books. I've got thousands of books through there, and it was one of my life's ambitions really, was to write a book. I mean, the world of publishing is difficult to get into. I was a journalist for many years, a music journalist, and you know, often music journalists do end up getting book contracts. I didn't stay the distance long enough really in that profession in order to get a book contract or anything like that, which was one of my long-lasting regrets. But I always wanted to write a book of some kind. I always thought to myself one day it would be marvellous to have a book that I could put on the shelf with all my other books and, you know, see my name on the spine. There is a thing called vanity publishing, which is where you pay a publisher, or you pay a printers rather, to publish a book in order to give out to your friends and family. It's usually very costly. I didn't really want to go down that route, but again, I'll explain in a minute how I actually then decided to do it. But you know, back in the 90s, I was really into Squeeze, and I was going around watching various dates of their tour. At the time they were on the Some Fantastic Place tour with my friend David Chandler, a very old friend of mine, and this was during the period when there were so many music books coming out. I think in the 90s is when that whole world of music publishing really started to explode. You know, there's all kinds of band and artist biographies coming out, and David and I, we used to talk to each other and wonder why it is that Squeeze didn't seem to get a look in. We sort of asked each other, I wonder why. And then David just turned to me one day and said, why don't you write the book? And at the time I was, well, this was before I was a music journalist. I was living in Leeds at the time, signing on the dole, trying to eke out a living as a writer. And I had no channels of communication open at all to the band members in Squeeze. I couldn't figure out how I would get in touch with them. I tried a few times, but that didn't work out. The one thing I did have was this. This was a Squeeze scrapbook, which David gave to me. This was put together, well, we put it together. It mainly contained clippings and articles from David's older brother's collection of old music magazines, so, you know, Sounds, Record Mirror, Enemy, etc, etc. So I did have this, and you know, a fairly decent number of press clippings. There wasn't really enough there to piece the book together. It would have been a kind of long article really. Now, so I kind of shelved the project, and it slept for many years. And then in the kind of noughties, I think it was, a couple of books came out. Jules Holland released his autobiography, and then Chris Difford did the same. And with those two books, an awful lot of stories and information that I would have needed entered the public domain. You know, in order to write a proper band biography, there are certain facts which are completely indispensable. You can't really do without them. You know, you need history. It's not enough to have a few press clippings. So what those two books gave me, they gave me more of a grounding in some of the more, you know, pertinent facts that I would need. But obviously I still didn't want to just paraphrase those two books. Not much point in doing that. There was another book called Song by Song, which was co-written by Jim Drury, and it was basically Difford and Tilbrook talking about their career and, you know, going through their catalogue song by song. Fantastic book, and a few really interesting stories that I could use from there. But again, it wasn't a proper full biography. Now, what I also had then, though, at my disposal is stuff that was online, and I just want to give a mention to two individuals. First of all, David Bailey, who is a Squeeze fan, what you might call a super fan. I think David used to work for Squeeze back in the mist of time. I think he used to work in their press office. I could be mistaken, but I've got that impression. And David's got a really amazing fan site called Packet of Three, and for several years now he's been uploading an amazing amount of stuff onto that website, old press clippings, reviews, interviews, a vast assemblage of really interesting documentation. So I started to go through all that, and I started to think to myself, what if I was to try and tell the story of Squeeze as it unfolded at the time? Drawing on vintage interviews and reviews and just trying to set Squeeze in the context of their times using this old press material. Because Squeeze did emerge at a very interesting time in pop music, and that's hopefully what I've tried to achieve in this book, is not just tell the story of Squeeze, but actually try and set them in context. They signed to A&M in 1978. It was just in the immediate aftermath of punk. They were managed by Miles Copeland, who was one of the big, he turned out in retrospect to have been one of the big major punk impresarios of the era. He also managed the Police, of course, which was his brother's, Stuart Copeland's band. But then with Squeeze, you have that whole kind of new wave era thing, and it's quite an interesting story, really. They went to America in '78 and toured in America, and it was a real sort of guerrilla-style incursion into the heartlands of America. It was a fairly eye-opening tour. They kind of toured around playing, drinking dens and dives, and they basically forged a whole new circuit for all the new wave bands that were going to come after them. They toured the US before the Clash did, and that was quite a groundbreaking tour. And anyway, so there were lots of stories that I could draw on using this amazing resource that David had. But the other big resource that I ended up having was another guy called Steve Bertram, who's in America, and Steve has a YouTube channel which has a lot of YouTube clips going back through the years, MTV, VH1, a lot of interview stuff on there, which I was able to use. It's nice to be able to use the actual words that you can hear the band members saying, rather than purely relying on interviews that have been transcribed or written up by press journalists. So I had all that resource. But then Steve really came through for me as well. I got in touch with him on Facebook, and he started to send me a lot of very interesting material, long lost radio interviews and more, a lot more press clippings and stories and things that were not in the Christopher memoir, and they were not in the Jules Holland book, and they were not in this song by song book, and it really helped to flesh things out a lot. So big thank you to David Bailey and Steve Bertram. I think without their intervention or without their help, this book would not have come to be, really, or it would have been a substantially lesser piece of work. There was also another book which came in handy quite late on, and that was the actual memoir of Miles Copeland himself. He wrote a book quite recently, and I was able to flesh out the story from that book. The story of how Jules Holland came to leave the band. There was a lot of very interesting stuff at the time. There was this big kind of rivalry between Squeeze and the Police, both managed by Miles Copeland, both signed to A&M, but of course the Police became massive really quickly, and Squeeze were rather left in the slipstream, and there was a lot of politics that went down with that. But the Squeeze story is a really interesting one, I think. You've got the story of the first album that was produced by John Cale, and he was totally off his head at the time, and all sorts of horror stories in the studio of him, cracking a whip at the floor and making them record Amazing Grace and all this kind of thing. And then you've got just the whole pop years, when they became really big really quickly, with Cool for Cats and Up the Junction, and for a time they were courted by the British music press, and they were seen as leaders of the pack, really. But then they went into a kind of tortuous phase of their history where the lineup went into quite a lot of disunity, with people leaving and having to get new keyboard players. Paul Carrack joined the band, and there was a lot of upheaval, and commercially Squeeze lost momentum, I think. And they worked very hard in America, and they did become big in America in the end, in a way. They sold out Madison Square Garden in 1982, and the big thing that happened for them, which I do go into in the book, is Diffin and Tilbrook. They started to get a lot of respect as songwriters. When Squeeze first came on the scene, they were not really that well respected, because I think they were perceived as having ridden on the coattails of punk, really, and they were not a punk band, but Miles Copeland tried to dress them up to fit in with that era a little bit, but they didn't really have very solid punk credentials. They were more of a pop band, really. But as time went on, their reviews started to improve massively as Christopher and Glenn Tilbrook's songwriting started to evolve. And I guess the big thing that happened, and there's quite a long chapter in the book about that, is their team up with Elvis Costello. Costello produced their album East Side Story from 1981, and it was that album really which I think it did catapult them into the forefront in terms of getting a lot of great reviews and a lot of critical respect. Like I said, by 1982 there was enough demand on the east coast of America to do Madison Square Garden for one night, and things were really taking off for them. And then Difford and Tilbrook decided to break up the band, and that's a whole other story as well, as to why they did that and what happened in the fallout from that. So I thought it was an interesting story. It was a story that was worth telling, and like I said, I think because of the period that they came from, that 1978 to 1982 period, it's such a rich period in British music history. And what I tried to do in the book was to set that in context, so you get some idea of the very fast moving, changing music scene from that era. You went from sort of pub rock in the mid-70s through to punk, new wave, post-punk, and then it started to get into the new romantic era. By 82, Squeeze were competing with a lot of very cool new romantic bands. You had Adam and the Ants coming through and all kinds of things like that, and I don't know, I just thought it was an interesting story, one that was worth telling. And, I'd read years ago that the thing about writing a book is you have to write the book that only you can write. And for years and years, I tried to write fiction, I tried to write various things, and all the time the Squeeze book was in the back of my mind and thinking, nobody's done it, still nobody's done a proper Squeeze biography. And I did finally realise this is the book that I am born to write. I'm not saying that nobody else could have written it, I'm just saying that if there's one book in my life that I would have regretted not writing, it's this one. So, I just went for it. It took about 2.5 years altogether from me starting to gather the information that I needed seriously through to the writing of it. The editing stage was very, very painstaking. I started the editing in May of 2021, and it's now December, and the book came out last week. Hell of a lot of work. Redrafting, editing, proof checking. So just want to thank a couple of people who were invaluable to me in this process. First of all, Richard McCook. Richard's got a good eye for accuracy, and I asked him to check all the facts in the book, chart placings, and that kind of thing. I wanted to get into the whole nitty-gritty of Squeeze's chart placings, because they're perceived as having been quite a successful group, and they did have some success. But they also had some difficulty in the charts with, records underperforming, and I really wanted to chart that, and also all the release dates and everything. An absolute nightmare trying to keep track of when things were released. So what Richard did for me is he checked all that for me. He checked all the release dates. He checked all the chart placings. So thank you, Richard. That was a job well done. So and then also I want to thank my friend John Bellamy here on the VC. John did this cover for me, and he did it completely free of charge, which was a really amazing thing to have done. I mean, to have got a cover as good as that without somebody doing it for me as a favour, it would have cost me quite a lot of money. So, John, I can't express to you how grateful I am. John and I went through the ringer with the cover. It took many, many months trying to get it sorted out. Quite a lot of work for John that all went unpaid. So, John, I am eternally in your debt for that. And also want to thank my friend Mark Follows for doing the picture of me there. Another friend of mine, Mark Oswin, he did the publishing imprint logo for me, Orchard Abbott, so thank you, Mark, as well. So all that remains to be said really is just to explain how the book came to be. So this is a self-published book, it's a DIY book, and it's done through Amazon KDP. And I think it's when I started to learn about Amazon KDP and how it worked that I really started to think this could actually happen. It's self-generated. You have to upload the PDF to Amazon KDP. You have to upload a cover. They do checks for quality and legal checks, and then the book comes out as print on demand, it's called. So there are no physical books in existence until somebody clicks to buy, and then wherever they are in the world, it just gets sent to the nearest printer. The books are made up and then they're sent out. And up until the point where I put it onto Amazon, I couldn't quite believe it was going to happen. I was worried that there were going to be legal checks, legalities to do with, am I even allowed to talk about these people's lives and all this kind of thing. But the moment it went on sale was one of the single most exciting moments of my life, and I realised that I've actually managed to publish a book. And within about maybe half an hour to an hour, I'd let a few people know, friends, and people had started buying it. And so I just want to say a big thank you to those people who bought it. You know who you are, in the first sort of half hour. And people started posting pictures on Facebook of them holding the book up. And it wasn't just people in this country, it was people in America. And, really exciting to see pictures of your book just turning up in people's living rooms in Chicago and California, Absolutely amazing. And of course I posted onto the Squeeze fan book pages, and I think within a week I'd sold over 100 copies, which I think is pretty good for a self-published book. Apparently most published books, self-published books, don't get to 200 sales, I've no idea how many sales I'll get to, but we'll have to see. I didn't do the book to make money. In fact, it actually cost me money to do the book, all the typesetting. But that's not really why I did the book. I did the book because I felt like I needed to do it. I'd always wanted to do it, and to finally have it in my hands is just so amazing. Actually, one thing I should mention, the book does contain some contributions from 3 former Squeeze members, and I got a couple of quotes on the back there from John Bentley, who was the bass player from 1980 through to 1982, and also Don Snow, who was the keyboard player in 1982. He's now known as John Savannah. So they were kind enough to read the book, to contribute a couple of stories, and then they gave me some quotes as well. So thank you very much, John. And also thank you to Harry Kakuli, who was the original bass player. He also slipped me a couple of stories, although he told me that there was one more story that he told me that I wasn't allowed to use in the book, so I respected his wishes on that score. But anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough. So if you want to buy the book, and this is not a kind of hard sell or anything, if you do want to buy the book, you can get it on Amazon. You have to search under books. That's the one thing people have been struggling to find it. If you search under all categories, and you won't find it. If you search under books, put my name in, put Squeeze in, it should come up. But if you want to buy it and you're struggling to find it, if you just drop me a message, and I'll give you a hand. So that concludes this little spiel. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye bye.